While out for a walk, Rickard and Mark found a dog alone in a snowy field. As they approached to help, they were shocked by what they saw. It was getting cold, and Rickard and Mark were about to head home. They had gone to the park, but soon realized they were the only ones brave enough to be out in the cold. As they walked back, they heard a faint noise from behind a tree. If they hadn't been alone in the park, no one would have heard it. They paused, and the noise came again. Mark spent most of his free time volunteering at animal shelters, and even though he hadn't seen the source of the noise, he could tell that it was coming from a dog. But what was a dog doing out in this weather? They wondered if something bad had happened to its owner, leaving the dog stranded and struggling to survive. When Mark and Rickard heard the sound again, they carefully approached the tree to avoid scaring whatever it was. They found a small, shivering figure curled up and covered in snow. The dog, weak and not moving, seemed to be waiting for its end. Rickard knelt and gently lifted the dog's face, finding it heartbreaking. The dog's eyes were closed, and it was barely moving. Mark tried to wake it, but it didn't respond. The dog was almost frozen and very thin, having likely endured the cold for days. Next to the dog, they discovered a small figure curled up and hidden in the dog's fur. When Rickard turned it over, both men were shocked by what they saw. "Hey, are you okay?" Rickard asked as he touched the body of a little girl, but he got no response. Rickard immediately removed his scarf, wrapped it around her, and gently carried her in his arms. Mark did the same with the dog, which was heavy and still limp. The girl's body was terribly cold, and she was unconscious and oblivious to what was happening. She couldn't have been older than 10. Rickard and Mark wondered if there was anything they could do, but neither of them were experts in healthcare. They knew that both the dog and the girl needed urgent help, and if that was going to happen, they needed to split up. Rickard hurriedly dialed the emergency number while Mark began reaching out to all the vets he knew. At this time of year, most of the vets were still closed for the holidays and there weren't many animal shelters open, but they had to try. Within 30 minutes, the ambulance arrived and Rickard followed it to the hospital, encouraging the girl to hold on. Mark decided to give it one last try and called a nonprofit pet project that he had heard about. Luckily, there was still someone in the office to take his call, and Mark quickly gave them the address and explained the situation. When he was done, the staff thanked him for finding the dog in time and asked if he could bring it to the shelter. When he arrived, the vet was already available to attend to the dog. It had a few minor injuries, but other than that, it was going to survive despite the harsh weather. Rickard had already arrived at the hospital with the little girl, and she was immediately rushed into one of the hospital units. She was wearing thin gloves, a winter jacket, and boots, but being out in the cold for so long had made her body nearly stiff. Her face was pale, and she was unresponsive. Her body temperature was about 25 degrees Celsius, much lower than normal, and her heart was beating only a few times per minute. The medical team quickly worked to warm her up using heated blankets and a respirator, checking that her organs were still functioning. They used special devices to pump blood through her body and replaced her wet clothes with warm, dry ones. Mark joined Rickard as they tried to get more information, but the hospital staff told them they could only release details to the girl's parents. The doctor informed them that she was out of immediate danger but faced a long recovery. They were relieved that the dog's efforts had saved her life. The next morning, Rickard and Mark went to the police department to find out if anyone was searching for her. They learned that a missing persons report had been filed and that her family had been looking for her all day. The family was on their way to the hospital. Rickard and Mark went back to the hospital, where a doctor had stayed overnight to monitor her. She had several seizures due to severe hypothermia, but by morning, her condition was improving. Though she hadn't opened her eyes yet, her temperature was stable, and doctors hoped she'd be able to talk and go home by the end of the day. The doctor told Rickard and Mark they could visit the girl once, with any further visits needing parental approval. When they entered her room, they were surprised to find her awake and looking around in confusion. She was too weak to move, but was trying to get out of bed. A nurse alerted the doctor, and Rickard and Mark were asked to leave. While they waited outside, hoping to get more news from a kind nurse, they noticed someone rushing into the hospital. "Where is Naomi? Where's my daughter?" a woman shouted, her face twisted with worry. Even the person who had come in with her was finding it difficult to calm her down. One of the nurses led her away until she disappeared from their sight. When the nurse returned, Mark approached her to ask what was going on. The woman who had arrived was the young girl's mother. She had just received news about her daughter and was there to look after her. Seeing her mother among a sea of unfamiliar faces had calmed the girl down, and she was now receiving more treatment from the doctor. Now that they knew there was someone here to look after her, neither Rickard nor Mark saw the need to stay much longer. They had done all they could. The nurse asked them to leave a number just in case, and then they left, returning to their home. 2 days later, Rickard and Mark received an unexpected call. It was the mother of the girl they had rescued. She requested to see them in person to thank them for what they had done for her daughter. They agreed to meet at a cafe close to the park and recount their experience. When they arrived, they discovered that it wasn't just the mother who had come to see them. The little girl was there too. Her name was Naomi, and she was 10 years old. She looked completely different from the last time they saw her. Her mother greeted them with a smile and immediately thanked them for saving her daughter. She introduced herself as Freya and told them what had happened. Naomi had gotten lost on her way back home from school. Since her home wasn't too far from the school and the neighborhood was generally safe, she'd usually return home by herself. But that day, something went wrong. A frigid blizzard hit and the snow grew almost 2 feet deep, making it difficult for her to walk. There were also drifts blocking the first floor of buildings. Eventually, the weather worsened and it became almost impossible for her to see anything in the falling snow. As she tried to find her way home, she became scared and frightened. Her first instinct was to find somewhere safe to shelter from the harsh winter, but as she stumbled around, she unknowingly moved farther away from home. She was also growing increasingly cold the more time she spent outside and started finding it difficult to remain on her feet. Before she knew it, she fell to the ground, and the next thing she saw was 2 men with her in a hospital room. Her mom had searched for her around the neighborhood for an entire day but couldn't find her because of the weather. No one had seen her, and even the street cameras were unable to capture any footage that could tell them where she had gone. Naomi's mom also had a lot of questions to ask. Rickard told her where they had found her daughter, along with the dog that had saved her life. If the dog hadn't been there to keep her warm, there was no telling how much worse the situation could have been. They confirmed that the dog was still with the vet but had already recovered. The only thing left was to make sure that it got adopted into the right family. Rickard and Mark told the vet about the dog, and the story was shared on social media, leading to many adoption requests. Though the shelter couldn't trace the dog's origins, they believed she had been abandoned. They were careful to find the right home. Naomi's mother, grateful to the dog for comforting her daughter and saving her life, decided she wanted to adopt it herself. She felt it was the best choice for their first pet and wanted to ensure the dog had a loving home. Mark provided the shelter's contact info, and they were thrilled to accept their offer. The adoption took weeks, but when they picked up the dog, it recognized Naomi and responded warmly. Naomi's mother thanked the dog as they took it home, grateful for its role in their lives. When they got home, they took the dog to a special corner of the house. Naomi's mom had bought new toys and other things the dog liked from the shelter. Naomi decided to name the dog Daisy. Even though they had been unsure at first, Daisy quickly adjusted to his new family and his personality shone through. Naomi and her mom took Daisy for walks in the park, where he made a new friend, and they played together every time. Having Daisy in their lives was a wonderful surprise, and they were grateful for how they found him. What do you think of this story? Let us know in the comments section. Thank you.